So welcome back. As I was observing a few moments ago, we are missing a lot of people at the moment, so perhaps as parking emerges or otherwise, we will fill up here. If everyone shows up, I think we will have one extra chair. So we are missing quite a few folks this semester. Welcome back. Welcome to this class. I'm looking forward to getting opportunity to work with you guys this semester. For many of you, you would have taken CSCI 3720 prior to taking this course, so we have met before. Some of you have also taken another course related to some of the things that we're going to talk about in the domain of enterprise programming. So some of you have taken that course, some of you may do so in the future. But we also have a number of students that are coming to us having taken Management 3200, I think is the course number. And so for you folks, welcome. The computing students, for the most part, don't bite or spit or otherwise mean you harm. So we are glad to have you with us this semester, and I am looking forward to a good semester of working together. We will start, I think we're scheduled to start at 9:45 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we go 9:45 to 11:45, so we're just together for what is at an hour and 20 minutes, and so I want to, every time we get together, dive in and try and cover a lot, because we do have a lot of topics to talk about this semester. We meet in this room for every class period, so we will be here during that time. If I am ever not here at 9:45, in my, I guess this is year 26 now of teaching, in my 26 years of teaching, I've only ever been late to class once, and ironically that was last semester, and it was because I forgot what time class started, and some of you might have been in the class when that happened, but I walked in, and strangely enough, I thought I was 10 minutes early to class, and the room was filled, and I was very confused, because that's never the case when I get there 10 minutes early. But I was late, and it was just totally a brain malfunction that day. So that is not the norm. I will be here for class every time, but the reason why I'm mentioning this is with my position as department chair, particularly with this being a morning class, a lot of times things happen in the morning that require my attention. So if I'm going to cancel class, I will let you know as soon as possible. I'll send out emails to everyone about that. But if you don't get an email from me that class is canceled and 9:45 comes and goes, don't just, head out the door at that point. If President Nolan calls, I can't really say, okay, I got to go to class now, I need to hang up. I kind of need to finish that phone call. So I will always make sure that I communicate with you guys what's going on, but I'll go ahead and beg your indulgence should that happen this semester. And I wouldn't have thought it would happen, but ironically enough, yesterday it happened, where I was supposed to be somewhere, and then something else happened, and I had to change plans at the last minute. So this class is a priority for me, but sometimes I might wind up, of necessity, coming in a couple minutes late. So glad you guys could join us. I'm assuming it's the problem that we were lamenting a few minutes ago, which is the joys of abundant parking and figuring out where you're going to park among the ample seats that are spots that are available for you. This is CSCI 4757, Information Systems Implementation, which I'm guessing all of you know. What I'd like to do in our time together today is talk about the course in a broad sense, and then go ahead and jump into our first discussion. And so we will do that. I would like to find out, though, who is here. And also start to get to know everyone's names. That'll take a little while for me. But if you'll bear with me for a moment, I want to call through the roll briefly on Thursday, where you can let me know if you want me to call you something other than your legal and official name, so I can update this. But for right now, I'm just going to go based on what the roster has for me here. Preston Armstrong. Okay. Cynthia Benjamin. Jonathan Bible. Alexandra Gibson. Alexandra Grubb. Nathan Hare. Joshua Harrell. Danelle Hennings. Christina Horn. Seth Howerton. Zachary Hyder. Oh, good timing. You get introduced as you come into class. Anthony Johnson. Blake Johnson. James Knight. William Kabenka. Roger. Benjamin McPhee. Chris Middleton. Wilson Miller. Benjamin Moretz. Jacob Mosley. Christopher Perry. Harvey Robbers. Ariel Rowland. Christopher Runyon. Ryan Schenkel. David Shin. Justin Short. Justin Suggs. So Justin Short, okay. I think we had a Justin, you were expected because of Justin S. Willie Wallace. Alan Watson. Cody Yates. Okay, and I know some people came in. Is there anyone who wasn't here when I called your name, perhaps? What's your name? Ah, all right. So it looks like the only person we're missing, Seth Howerton, Harvey Robbers. Right? Okay, neither of you guys came in. All right. Well, let's talk about what we're going to be doing this semester, what this course is about, why you should care about it, what it means for you. When a company purchases an enterprise information system, such as SAP ERP, Oracle ERP, Microsoft Dynamics, or any number of other products that are out there on the market, that is a substantial investment of money. Okay, a company that is purchasing SAP ERP, large company, and doing it as a greenfield investment, meaning it's new to them. Easily $25 to $40 million. Okay, when you buy that, it's not like upgrading to Windows 10 or installing Microsoft Office, where you put a DVD or something similar into a computer and a little wizard pops up and you hit next, 17 times and accept the licensing agreement, and an hour later, boom, you're ready to go. Enterprise information system software is extremely complicated. Couple that with the fact that the designers of this software have created a structure whereby a manufacturing company that makes automobiles could run the software, a bakery that bakes cakes and donuts and foodstuffs can run this software, a chemical company can run the software, a university can run the software. A huge variety of different kinds of business can all be running the exact same software. And kind of the statement that is often made about snowflakes would definitely be true here. No two companies are running it exactly the same way, because no two companies do everything exactly the same way. So how is it that Coca-Cola and Pepsi could both be running the same software system, but yet be two very, very different companies? Even though they're running the same software, what they have had to do is go into those systems and set them up for the way that they want to do business. That's called configuration. And so what companies will do is when they are installing software, they will put a huge amount of effort into configuring the software. Matter of fact, if this is the life cycle of a software installation at a company, you know, up front, you're looking at a lot of money being spent, a lot of human effort going into this, and then a lot of work in configuration. But then over time, it's not like this drops off to zero. What happens is over time, we decide we want to change our business processes. We acquire new plants. We buy new equipment. Things change on almost an ongoing basis. So although there's a lot of effort put in up front, this still winds up dropping off to a curve that perhaps looks something like this. Well, what's under this curve is something that should be very, very interesting to you, which is jobs. And in particular, really, really, really good paying jobs. Now, why are these jobs really, really good paying? If you were hired at a company and were told your job is to install Microsoft Office on all of our machines, well, depending upon how many machines they have, that might represent a couple of weeks or a couple of months of work, and then you'd be done and your job would be over. Well, what we're talking about here is something that is extremely complicated. When you install Microsoft Word or any other modern software application that you probably, you know, would put on your laptop or desktop machine, there's a little wizard that pops up. It asks you a few questions. You click a few buttons, you make a few choices, and boom, you're done. Well, when you finished installing SAP ERP and log into it, there's no wizards. There's nothing there. You have to know how to go into the system and set the system up based on your own expertise. And it is very, very much not trivial to do that. I was looking in my notes here to see if I could find the exact number, and I'm not seeing it right off. But there are well over 100,000 different configuration options that are available to you with SAP ERP. You can say, all right, we want to execute this business process this way, or you could say, we want to execute a business process this way. This is the way we want to handle accounts receivable. This is the way we want our general ledger to work. This is the way we want to post these kinds of transactions. All of that has to be configured. And the reason why I say that no two companies, even though they run the same software, operate exactly the same, is because with this many decisions, the chances of two different companies making the exact same decision about any multiples of those things, very, very, very unlikely. Which is why you have people that work their entire career for one company using the resource, go to another company, use the same resource, and find they have to invest a lot of time in re-educating themselves. So there's a lot of interesting things in this domain in the way of jobs. Where this is particularly relevant for those of you that are joining us from the business side of the house is what we're going to talk about a lot this semester is business processes and how they are enabled in an ERP package. So if we were to hop in a bus and drive over to Oak Ridge National Laboratories, or drive over to Eastman Chemical, or drive over to Moly, just some of the companies in this region that run SAP ERP. And we walked in and found a random clerk, and we said, what do you do? And they might say, well, as part of my job, I log into the system, and I do this, and I do this, and I do this, and I run this transaction, and these are the things that I do. And then if we said, okay, great, how does that really work? they probably would look at you and say, I have no clue. You know, I know the buttons I click, but I don't know how it actually works. If we walked to shipping and we said, hey, you guys here work shipping. How many years you been doing shipping work? Guy might say, I've been doing shipping work for 25 years. And we might say, great, that package right there that you're getting ready to ship out? They'd say, yeah. And we'd say, what chart of accounts or what accounts are going to be affected when that leaves the facility? They would be like, what? I have no idea. Everything that we do in business has an accounting and a record-keeping implication. How does that work? By the time we get to the final exam, or hopefully a lot sooner than that, you should be able to say, okay, in a operation, when we receive new inventory, here's all the different documents that are going to be created. Here's the content of every one of those documents. Here's the accounting implications of that in terms of financial accounting. Here are the cost accounting implications of that. And if I had to, I could go into the system and show you even things like what database tables are affected by a given transaction. Now that's the difference between a good job and a job that pays really, really, really good money. Because there are a lot of people that know how to use the system, but they would have no clue as to how to actually configure it and get it to work. It's kind of the difference between knowing how to drive a car and knowing how the car really works, okay? I know that when I get in my car, I sit down, I have keyless ignition, so I push the button and the engine turns over. I have a vague sense of what's happening there. But if we talk to an automobile mechanic, they can say, okay, here's what's going on. Push that button, the fuel pump starts, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and your car starts. And then you put it in gear, and this is what actually happens. That level of understanding is what we want to work towards this semester. Now, would it be therefore possible that by the time we ended this semester, you could go out and get a job as a consultant having mastered all of the things that you need to know? No. To know everything you would need to know is a multi-year journey. But we can get you very much started on that journey to the extent that when you finish, you can go to work for a company and they can take you from there. And that's what we're going to be doing in this class. We're going to talk a lot about the core business processes, procurement, fulfillment, warehousing, materials management, other things of that sort. We're going to talk a lot about accounting this semester. And I know all of you are just really, really excited about that. How many of you have taken a course in financial accounting? Okay, you have an advantage, which is not to say that those of you that have not taken a course in financial accounting are doomed, but the people who have taken a course in financial accounting have a little bit of a head start on you guys, because we're going to talk a lot about accounting things this semester. But everything we talk about is geared around this theme of you truly understanding how these really, really complex systems work. And I may be a little bit geeky when I make a statement like this, but I really find there to be almost a beauty in how some of this software is constructed. I mean, it's really, really complicated, but it was really, really well designed and thought out and architected. And it's kind of interesting to see how all of this works, which means that if you graduate and never actually work with SAP specifically after graduation, the things that you learn in this class will help you in working with other companies' products, or maybe even help you in developing your own product. So there are some universal things that we're going to look at that I think you should hopefully find really, really interesting for us to do so. So we're going to talk a lot about business processes. We're going to place a real focus on data handling within ERP systems and how a company can buy a software package and set it up so that they can run their business under the management of that software product. So that's what we're going to talk about when we get together on Tuesday and Thursday. What are you going to be doing for homework? We don't have a lab in this class where we all go to the lab and work on things together. Lab is basically the homework that you're going to be doing. And there's some homework that you're going to be doing where you will be reading chapters out of the textbook and answering some questions. There's going to be some other question sets that you'll answer from time to time. But the bulk of your homework this semester will be lab work that I have put out in D2L. Maybe you've looked at it already at this point or not, but you're going to step through the process of configuring SAP ERP such that a company could actually use that software to do its business processes. Essentially, you are getting a raw software product and you're going to learn how to actually set it up. I've had students before, and I don't know what possessed this one student to do this one time, but a few years ago, a student told me that he was going for a job interview, and he had printed out all of his lab work for this class and had it like in a 3-ring binder, and he actually took it with him on a job interview. And the person interviewing kind of took it from him and was flipping through it and was, really kind of interested in it, and then started asking the student questions about several things. Oh, well, tell me about this and this and this. And the net result was he got the job. And the person who was interviewing with was really blown away by the fact that the student actually knew this stuff. Most computing or business students, even those that study ERP on a university level, don't take courses in configuration and don't dig into the nitty-gritty of things to the degree that we will this semester. So this is something that distinguishes our graduates. I can tell you this. If you're a computing student and you want a job with some of the companies in the area and you walk in and you say, I know ERP configuration, I took this course at ETSU, a lot of the employers in the region in the computing domain are already very familiar with this course, that will open some doors for you. But I can also tell you that the more exciting opportunity here is if you're an accounting or finance or management student and you walk into some of the companies in this region and say, hi, I'm an accounting student and I did all my accounting work. Oh, and by the way, I really understand a lot about SAP ERP, and you can talk to them intelligently about that. That is going to open doors for you in a tremendous way, because that is a very, very rare animal. There was a business student who took the 3720 class that some of you have taken. I think this was about 2 semesters ago, and he went for an interview with a company in this area, and as part of his interview he mentioned to them that he knew Tableau, and pretty much once that was said, he had the job, because they'd never talked to an accounting interviewee before that knew that product, and they used it extensively in their organization, and they realized that they could onboard him a lot faster. So there's a real opportunity here for you that I hope very much works out to your advantage over time. Comments or questions? As we go through stuff, there'll be times when I will ask you questions, even here later this morning, but anytime I'm talking, I'm more than happy to be interrupted with questions or such. Anybody have anything? I know it's the first day and you're just like, okay, just got to get through today. So, yes, sir.
I have a quick question. Will there be student licenses for Tableau for this semester?
We will not do anything formally with Tableau, but if you want to explore Tableau for the sake of learning a little bit more about it, if you will send me an email, I can provide that for you. Okay? Other questions? By the way, since we don't go to the lab, I really do recommend that your life will be a lot easier if you have a machine of your own that you can install the SAP GUI on. If you can't do that, certainly you can go to the computing labs in this building for the sake of doing your lab work, but it probably will make your life a lot easier for you to use your own system. For this class, for the things that we do, it really should not matter whether you're running on a PC or a Mac. Sometimes in the domain of development, there are some differences in those two environments, and the Mac people sometimes kind of run into a bit of a brick wall. But for configuration work, usually there's not an issue there. And if any of you have questions or need assistance with getting things set up on your own machine, let me know. Okay? All right, so let's kind of get into more about this topic of, I'm a company, I just bought this really, really big bundle of software that I have been assured by the vendor will solve all of my problems. And of course, the vendor would never oversell me on the benefits of their product. And so I am very, very hopeful that this will in fact enable me to run my company much better. And this is an example of, it doesn't matter what I bought, whether it's Oracle, SAP, IBM, Microsoft, or any number of other smaller companies out there. I just bought this software. I need to get it to work for my company. One of the things that is on my plate is this idea of configuration, which is what this course is dominantly focused on. What is configuration? If I had to give you a definition of it, which I have right here, what we are going to do is we're going to go into the existing controls within the software to get it to work the way we want it to work, using existing controls within the software to conform its functionality to the desired behavior. So if we were going to use Windows 10 as an example of this, this would be like in Windows 10, we would go into the control panel, we would go into the administrative settings, and we might make certain changes to the system to get it to actually work the way we want it to work. But we are using controls that were put there by the company that created this software. They knew that we might want to change certain facets of the system. So they gave us the ability to do that. So all we are doing is going in and configuring the system so that it behaves the way we want it to behave. And in fact, if we're talking about this in a corporate environment, there might be certain decisions that we make as a company on an administrative level, and we lock the machine into a given configuration such that the end user can't change it. You know, they can't go in and make this particular adjustment because we want all of our machines to work this particular way. So that would be the analogy of configuration. Well, we also have personalization. Now, whereas configuration in my Windows 10 example are the things that my company does to get the software to work the way we want it to work in the grand scheme of things for the execution of our business processes, personalization is something that the end user can do to make his or her life a lot easier. It's kind of the equivalent of, we allow the end user to set the desktop background in Windows 10. If they want a picture of their dog, we let them put a picture of their dog there. Okay? When they fire up Microsoft Word, if they toggle on the little thing that puts those paragraph marks in every time you press the Enter key, then they have the ability to control that. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about personalization. One example of this might be, thank you. One example of this might be, If you don't know, Sonia Batchelder, the computing department's fabulous executive aide. She may be visiting us a lot this semester. Or sometimes I might stay in the office and let her come down and teach for us. So let's say one example of personalization might be, in my organization, we have 17 plants. So across the entire scope of the organization, somebody needs to say, well, this happened in plant 1, and somebody else needs to be able to say this happened in plant 10 or whatever have you. But in my job, I work in plant 13. So anytime there's a field on a screen that asks me what plant this happened in, I always put in plant 13. So I can tell the system, just go ahead and fill in plant 13 for me every time. And if I want to, if I ever need to, I could click on that field and delete it and change it to something else. But go ahead and pre-populate that for me. That's personalization. The end user has the ability to go in and do things like put in default values for fields, hide certain fields. There's a very, very complicated menu path. They could go in and they could create favorites. Those kinds of things fall into the category of personalization. Well, we have other options available to us. Modification. In modification, we look at the software and we say, we want the software to do something that it currently doesn't do. And after exploring the options associated with configuration, we can't find a way to configure the system to do what we want it to do. So we need to modify the system beyond what was envisioned by the people who originally created this software. So modification is we change the software itself to reflect a variant customer execution. This is also called customization. So let me give you a rather silly example. For whatever reason in my company, when we create documents in Microsoft Word, we don't read from left to right, we read from top to bottom. As far as I know, there's no way in Microsoft Word to go in and toggle a control to make it so that as you type, the words flow vertically as opposed to horizontally. I know you can change it to go from right to left, because in some languages people read from right to left, but I don't think there's a way you can change it to go from top to bottom. So if we wanted to use Microsoft Word, but we wanted the text to read from top to bottom, we would have to go in and change the computer source code that Microsoft wrote. That's what I'm talking about when I say modification or customization. Those of you that have taken the ABAP development class, the enterprise programming class in the spring, you've seen this. For those of you that may take that course this spring, you will see this then. But ABAP, the language that SAP ERP is written in, totally open source. You can drill down and look at the source code and you can change it. And many, many times companies will do that. They'll go in and they'll say, you know, we can't get to where we want to get through configuration, so we're going to have to go in and we're going to have to modify the system. Now, one example of this that's a different kind of fitting ERP to the needs of our company is enhancement. Sometimes we need to add something to the system. So what we're talking about here is the system will mainly do what we want it to do. But there's one thing that it doesn't do for us. Let me give you a very specific example related to one of the department's partner companies. If you have ever driven through Kingsport near the Eastman Chemical facilities, depending upon how you have driven past their facilities, you might have noticed they actually operate a fairly large rail yard where there are train tracks and there are rail cars there, and they do a lot of receiving of raw materials by way of train, and they ship a lot of stuff out by train. At the time that Eastman Chemical bought SAP ERP, there was no functionality in the system for what they now call rail car management. So they tasked a team of developers with writing a system for rail car management. And so if you were working over at Eastman, shipping products in or receiving products out, you might launch certain transactions that have facets of that transactions that relate to train cars. That would be something that Eastman wrote and is a part of just their installation. Now, what's notable about enhancement is we're not necessarily changing anything that's a part of what SAP has written. We're just adding stuff to it. It'd be kind of like if we compared modification and enhancement to, let's say, going and buying a birthday cake. If we went over to Food City and bought a cake and it was a plain white cake, and then we pulled out some equipment and we airbrushed a picture on it, or we wrote, you know, happy birthday Nelson or something like that, that would be enhancement because we're adding to an already established cake. On the other hand, if we went and bought a cake and then like cut it up into tiny cubes and threw it into a giant bowl with some brownie pieces and chocolate chips and something like that and created a whole different kind of dessert, that would be more along the lines of modification. But if we're just adding to the product that we already purchased, that falls into the category of enhancement. Sometimes what we are doing is we're not modifying the core system, and we're not really adding to something that's already there. We're creating something that's totally unique. Now, my example of rail cars, I think, is probably an example of enhancement because it interfaces with a lot of the things that are already in the system as a way of providing added functionality. But if I were to ever say, okay, you know, what I need to do is I need to create something that just, there's not a functionality in the system to do that, then that's either the domain of, it's sometimes called custom development or sometimes called customer development. That's why I wrote that bullet point this way. So here's my question for you. What are the pros or cons of any of the 5 things up here? You know, what are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about and factor into our evaluation before we decide to engage in any of these activities? What do you think? What kinds of things do we need to be thoughtful about? Cost. Absolutely. And I'm going to go ahead and write that down if I can here. Haven't used my pen yet today. Oh, and my surface might not be. Okay, so I can write with my finger, but not my high-tech stylus here. So that makes sense. Cost, okay? So cost, now what do we need to, cost is a very, very good answer, but what does cost need to be balanced against? Cost benefit. So we look at, okay, what is this going to cost us? What benefit is it going to give us? And is it worthwhile? Now let's talk about cost a little bit more. There's clearly the cost of me paying someone to engage in any of these activities. What other cost dimension do we need to think of, though, beyond that? I pay someone to modify the system. I pay someone to configure the system. Am I done? I have to think about this in the long run, okay? And this is where, if I'm not careful, I can get myself into trouble. Let me give you 2 examples of this. one involving a company that I just mentioned in a situation I just mentioned. But let me start with another one. Gateway Computers is a company that we don't hear much from anymore. There was a time when they were one of Dell's major competitors, and Gateway had a real presence in the personal computer market. They operated a chain of stores called Gateway Country. You know, we're going back a few decades now, probably nothing that any of you would have ever experienced. Gateway bought SAP ERP, and there were a number of things that they wanted the software to do that it couldn't do. So they engaged in modification, and life was fine. What do software companies do over time? They update their products, right? Sometimes they come up with a whole new version. You know, we go from Windows 7 to Windows 10. Sometimes, though, even if you're running Windows 10, there are security updates and there are patches and there are things like that. Well, what happens if I modify my software and then the company releases an update to the software? What's that? We could run into modification of, or the trying to integrate the new things could interfere with the modifications that we've done, because we had every right to modify it, but it's not like we can ask the company that we bought the software from to take that into account when they release their updates. So maybe, for example, they released a particular module, we went in and changed that module, and then in their update, they released an update to that module. Well, we now run the risk that their update would cause our system to no longer run. So as a result, we don't apply their update. Gateway ran into a problem where they modified their system, and so SAP came out with a new version, and Gateway said we can't install that because it might break our modifications. Year later, SAP comes up with another version, same answer. Over a period of time, Gateway now finds themselves running software that's like 5 and 6 years behind their competitors, and they can't upgrade because of concerns that upgrading would break their modifications. That's a real problem for a company, and that's a real problem that Gateway faced that ultimately caused them an awful lot of money. I mentioned a few moments ago Eastman and their railcar example. Later this semester, we will talk about a product called SAP S4. It is the next generation of ERP software that SAP released over a year ago that companies are moving to now, that features column store databases and memory databases, high performance, simplified financials, a whole bunch of real benefits for a company, for them to want to move there. Well, what Eastman is evaluating right now is they're saying, we have a current system that has a railcar system that we developed. Well, at the time we developed that, SAP didn't have a railcar management system. They have one now. SAP wrote their own railcar management software that Eastman has not been using because they had their own. So now the question is, okay, we being Eastman in this scenario are about to move to S4. Do we rewrite our railcar functionality to work with S4? Or do we say we're just going to start using SAP's railcar management system when we move to S4? Which means that we're probably going to have to change some of the ways that we do things in our company. That's what they're trying to figure out. And ultimately, that decision is going to come back to, oh, my pen now works. Cost versus benefit. You know, what's this going to cost? What's the pros of going this direction? What's the cons of going this direction? So one of the things, in answer to my question before, is one of the potential dangers associated with this is the position it might leave me in as a company looking down the road when I want to upgrade my system over time. Now, before we continue that thought, I had one point left on this slide I want to mention, which is depending upon what you are reading, some sources, and by that I certainly don't mean your textbook, but some sources use the terms configuration and customization as interchangeable terms. And we won't do that. We will be very precise here and recognize that configuration is this idea of using the existing controls within the software, whereas customization is our stepping outside of that to add on the additional things. And by the way, customization, is one of the synonyms for modification. As an aside that has nothing to do with what we've been talking about, I do record our class sessions. I will, this semester, because of some challenges that some students have brought up related to iTunes U in the past, my plan is to put the class-related videos out on YouTube. It actually seems to make it a little bit more accessible regardless of the device or platform you are working from. My microphone last semester started behaving really flaky, and I just noticed that now it is blinking green and red, which the red is not a good sign, okay? So I'm going to have to switch to a different microphone in future classes, but I don't know what that means in terms of our recording for today. So if we don't get one, that's the reason. This is several years old, and it has a battery in it that is not end user serviceable. So really, really great design there. And so I'm probably just going to have to retire this equipment and move to a different kind of microphone. But I will be making those available for future classes. The one for today is kind of a big question mark. Any questions about this before we forge ahead? Okay, so I don't want to beat a dead horse here, excuse the expression, but I do want to make sure we understand the distinctions between configuration and customization, okay? So configuration, this is what we are going to be talking about this semester. And this is fundamentally getting the system ready for our business processes. Let me give you an example of this. Here at ETSU, all of you experience the fact that you can register for classes. And you obviously were successful in doing that because you are here today and you appear on my roster. Well, you also have the privilege, by virtue of being an ETSU student, of getting to pay money to ETSU on a regular basis to sustain your enrollment here as a student. Now, some of you have financial aid, some of you have scholarships, but ultimately there's some money or similar flowing from you to the university. Normally this happens on the Friday before classes begin, but the university decided to push this back until yesterday evening. And I don't know whether or not they even did it yesterday evening or not, but some of you might have heard before about this process that ETSU engages in called the purge. And the purge is basically a computer program that steps through all of the enrollments students have for a given semester and asks the very important question, do they owe us money? And if the answer to that question is yes, it checks a couple of other things, and if it doesn't like what it sees and other things that it checks, it deletes that student off of class rosters. Maybe in your time here at ETSU you have been purged before. If not, I'm guessing you have known other students who have, okay? That's a business process. There are other universities out there that might manage that differently. I actually worked at a university before that essentially ran the purge multiple times in a semester. They would run it like right now, but your whole bill wouldn't be due like right now. So they would run the purge right before midterm exams. and then they would run the purge right before final exams. So you could be a student up until right before final exam week, and if you owed the university money, you weren't taking your final exam because you were deleted from the class at that point. Now that's different than the way ETSU does it. That's an example, though, of we go in as a company and we decide this is the way we want to do this. We get an order from a customer. Customers never ordered from us before. Do we ship out their money before they pay us? Do we require them to pay us first? If they send us a check, do we ship out the order as soon as we receive the check, or do we wait until their check clears the bank? Those are business decisions that companies have to make that they embody in their computer systems through configuration. And this can be as sophisticated or as trivial as we want to do this. All of you should have, by virtue of courses that you took before this class, played ERP Sim. Okay, everybody familiar with ERP Sim? You've experienced that. When you used to set prices in the context of ERP Sim, you would go in and say, we want to sell a 1 kilogram box of blueberry muesli for €5, and you'd set that price, and you were done. Well, in the real world, and we'll talk more about this later in this semester, prices are actually referred to as conditions, because you can create a whole set of rules related to pricing. And you could say the price of a 1 kilogram box of blueberry muesli is $5. Unless the customer's in distribution channel 27, and if they are, they get a 5% discount. And if they buy more than 100 boxes of blueberry muesli at one time, we're going to give them a 2% discount. And if they're in Tennessee, we're going to give them a 1% discount because they're close to our factory. And if they're in this other country, they're going to have to pay a 5% premium to account for international shipping. And we could create this whole set of rules that the computer will process every time in trying to set prices, which may result in us having 20 customers all buying 1 kilogram boxes of blueberry muesli from us and none of them paying the exact same price. That's a part of the configuration process. That's us saying we want to be able to distinguish our customers in certain ways. Now, you might not remember this, but let me give you another ERP Sim example. Remember, you could set prices and have different prices depending upon distribution channel. You could have a price for distribution channel 10, a different one for channel 12, and a different one for channel 14. When you looked at data, you could look at data from customers in the north, customers in the west, or customers in the south. But you couldn't set different prices depending upon whether they were in the north, south, or west. Everybody paid the same price, even though you could subdivide the sales data and look at it differently. Is that because of a flaw in SAP ERP? No. That's the way that the creators of the simulation configured pricing to work. They could very easily have said you could set different prices not only based on distribution channels, but based on the region of the country. And you can imagine, remember when you used to put in advertising and you had like this grid and you could advertise different products in different areas? They could have given you the equivalent of a grid like that to put in prices. The reason why they didn't do it, make it really, really complicated. And they didn't think it would add a lot of value, it just add complexity. Well, companies go through that exact same evaluation process. How should we set prices? What different ways do we want to allow pricing to be carved up? And companies will make different decisions. That's part of configuration here. So it's just getting the system ready to work the way we want it to work. Another dimension of configuration is setting up the enterprise structure. Enterprise. Wow, I just really messed that word up there. Let's try that again. Setting up the, oh, and that taught me, now my pen doesn't work. There we go. Enterprise structure. In my company, we have 7 plants. We have a West Coast sales team and an East Coast sales team. We have 7 distribution centers. We have a Canadian division. We have a Mexican division. Okay? That's the way my company is structured. Your company may be structured differently. Here at ETSU, we have the College of Business and Technology and the College of Arts and Sciences and the College of Nursing. And we have all of these different colleges that give us a way of breaking up the university into different parts, and different programs are in different colleges and so on and so forth. Every company out there is going to have an enterprise structure. And that enterprise structure is going to be very important for us in the context of an enterprise information system. Why? Why is this something that we need to make sure we have correct when we're setting up an enterprise information system? What is going to be highly dependent upon our definition of our enterprise structure? I'll give you a hint. We talked about it earlier this hour. I will give you a second hint. Some of you have taken a class on this topic and some of you have not. Accounting, okay? Here's some general principles to know about accounting. There are expenses. Nobody wants to claim expenses in the organization. Everybody wants to play hot potato and explain why those aren't ours, those are yours, because that affects things like profitability analysis and so on. So organizations create what are called cost centers for the sake of accumulating costs. Cost centers work as kind of like a sponge that absorbs costs, and then they allocate those costs across the entire organization. Well, we have to have a properly defined organizational hierarchical structure to know how this could possibly work. We are sitting in a classroom right now that if you were to hang out here, and I don't recommend you do this, but if you were to hang out in this room all day today, and we'll say all day tomorrow, because that would cover Tuesday, Thursday, and Monday, Wednesday. At some point, you would find yourself sitting in a room with a bunch of nursing students, which could be a really cool thing from your perspective or not. I don't know. And that is because this classroom actually belongs, well, hang on, this is 331. Either this room or the room next door, I've forgotten which, actually belongs to the nursing department, and they let us use it. Which technically means that in the grand scheme of costs, they're paying for the cost of that room, but they're letting us use it because sometimes we let them use some of our stuff. But every room on this campus is assigned to someone for the sake of them being charged for it and that being reflected in their budget. That's an example of just how trivial this gets. I mean, literally every room on this campus is reflected somewhere in terms of ownership and costs associated with it. Nobody wants to go through and say, okay, that broom closet over there in the corner, that belongs to such and such a department. So instead what we do is we do stuff like, okay, 4th floor, Nick's Hall, that's the computing department. And in fact, this building is split between the computing department, the nursing department, ITS, and Appalachian Studies, okay? And so the university, this asset is kind of communally contributed to by all of those different entities. And costs associated with operating this building are divided up according to those entities. We could sit down and create a very, very large hierarchical structure that shows how everything in this campus fits together. That's enterprise structure. That's what we're talking about here. We have to get that set up properly in our organization for the reasons that I just mentioned and for other reasons that we will talk about. The first one that I put on the list here and this third one are really, really similar, but I'll just go ahead and make it a separate item here. This is where configuration is where we define our business rules. Very early in my career, very, very early when I started teaching, I needed some work for the summer. And one summer, I wound up working for an organization, doing a job that I hope none of you ever have to do. I mean, it's not like the worst job I could think of, but it wasn't really a fun job for me. Maybe some people might like it if you're like really mean. But I worked for a collections department for an organization. And my job was to call people up on the phone and talk to them, and not call people, call businesses on the phone and talk to them about how the fact that they owed us money and they had not paid us. Now, we literally had a process that had different levels to it. And like when a customer who was a really, really good customer, let's say the bill was, they were supposed to have paid us on Tuesday and it's Wednesday, it's not like we called them up and read them the riot act. As a matter of fact, if they've never been late before and they're a really great customer, we don't do anything. But if they're now, let's say 2 weeks past due, we give them a little call, and usually because that's a little bit nicer than a letter, and they're a good customer, and we're really, really nice to them. Hey, Bonnie, good to talk to you. Hey, did you notice that you've got an invoice to us that's still open at this point? You know, when do you think you're going to be able to send out payment? What's your plans? And a lot of times they say, oh, you know, we overlooked that or whatever. You know, they're a good customer. Stuff like that happens. Well, then we had the next level, which was, you know, maybe we had that conversation and a month has gone by and we still don't have our money. And so we call them back again, and it's like, you know, hey, Bonnie, you know, we talked last month, and you had said this, and here's the situation. Well, yeah, we had different levels, okay, to the point that the last level was getting a letter from our lawyer saying that we were taking you to court to sue you for the money. We called that the lawyer letter, okay? That whole process in business is referred to as dunning. Dunning is the process of getting the money from people who owe it to you and they are past due. It was an interesting summer job, and as I said, I would not want to do that again. There's absolutely nothing fun about that at all. But what was really interesting is sometimes you'd pull up a customer and the computer would tell you things like they're 240 days late, but their account had a flag that said they were not eligible for dunning. And when you looked at the account, you began to realize why. This was a company that maybe did $20 million a year business with us every year, and they're past due on a $5,000 invoice. Are you really going to call them and give them a hard time about $5,000 if they're a $20 million company? No. You might send them a postcard with a smiley face on it that says, hey, if you get around to it, you know, will you think of us and send us a check? But you don't want to tick them off. Well, that's an example of a business rule. You create, you know, okay, when after someone's past due this much, we're going to do this. And then after this much time passes, we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this. But we have exceptions. This kind of customer we treat differently, and this kind of customer we treat differently. And like I was saying before, we can make those rules as simple as we wanted to. Anybody that owes me money and they're 1 day past due, I'm throwing a lawyer letter at them. You know, probably not a good strategy, but I could do it that way. Or we could be much more nuanced. Those are the kinds of things that companies, now what will happen is companies will get together and people will decide what the process should be, and they'll probably write that out, and then they'll give that to someone and say, make our computer do this. And that's the job of configuration. You go in and set up the business rules so that things happen the way they're supposed to happen. Another important part of configuration of necessity is populating the system with needed data and testing. Maybe my boss comes in to see me and says, hey, I want you to set up a new dunning schedule for us. Here's the new rules we want applied. Make that happen. and I go in and I configure the system to do that. Unless I'm very, very bad at my job, I'm going to want to test it to make sure it really does work the way it's supposed to work, which might mean putting some sample data into the system, running certain transactions, and making sure things behave as they are desired to. I mention this because this is, first of all, this is what you're going to be doing for your lab/homework for this class. And what you are going to find is, and I don't recall the exact sequence here, but you're going to do like phase 1. As a matter of fact, let's actually, we can look at that real quick here. So let me shell out here for a moment. And phase 1, you are going to set up financial accounting, okay? And phase 1 will not be the end of financial accounting. You're going to do financial accounting stuff all throughout the semester. But you'll notice that these phases are broken up where, just like we were talking about, in part 1, you start defining the structure of your company. You define a company code. You define a business area. You define a chart of accounts. You define credit control areas. You create variants for posting periods. And some of this stuff, you might know what those things are, but my expectation is that really none of you have an in-depth understanding of any of those things, which is why you're taking this class. Okay, so you'll set up the enterprise structure in part 1 of phase 1. Then you'll go in and you'll create these business rules. Now, some of these business rules, for example, one of the things that you'll do is you'll say, account numbers in our company are this many digits long, and they only consist of numbers. You might say that seems like a pretty trivial rule. It is, but we've got to tell the system that. Do you want 10-digit account numbers? Do you want 8-digit account numbers? Can there be letters in account numbers? How do you want the account numbers to be generated? Do you want them to be sequential? Do you want the system to look at the address of the customer and break up account numbers accordingly? A company I worked with in the past, every state had a different 2-digit code, and the first 2 digits of the customer's account code was based on what state they were in. So if you saw that they started with a 50, you might know that they were in Texas. That's a rule, and you define rules related to things like that. Then you're going to see that you put some sample master data into the system. You define a retained earnings account. You do some, we're talking about financial accounting here, so you create a hierarchy here for various costs. The interesting thing about this, some of the phases or some of the individual exercises here, like I'll back up, defining a company code, you know, you can do this in probably about 2.5 minutes. Defining a business area will probably take you about 45 seconds. But some of the things like creating hierarchies for cost for your cost control, this one exercise right here has a related Excel spreadsheet with it. That'll probably take you about half an hour to 45 minutes. So some parts of this are really, really quick, and some require a little bit more time. That's why this is broken up, so that you're not doing all of this like in one sitting. But the very last thing that you'll do is you'll actually test things out. You'll try and post some things to your general ledger and make sure they go where you're expected and the transactions are actually accepted or rejected. So you're going to be modeling this process that we've been talking about here in our lab work, where that you'll do the configuration and then you'll put in some sample data and then you'll actually test. Okay, so that's configuration. Any questions about any of this? Okay, let's real quick talk about customization. See if I can get my pen to cooperate here. Customization. This is programming, okay? So for those of you that are computing students, this is why at some point in the future you might take a course in enterprise programming and learn how to engage in customization. This would be beyond the capabilities of our business students, unless you want to take a few programming classes to get ramped up for that, but that's certainly not something that we see to be very, very typical. This is where you're actually going in and you're either changing or adding to the underlying computer source code. If we're talking about doing this in the context of SAP products, SAP has a programming language called ABAP. ABAP, all capital letters, is the language that you do this in. ABAP's actually a pretty fun language. I've had a lot of students that don't like to program before that say they really like ABAP programming. It's kind of an interesting resource out there. ABAP, highly in-demand skill. Developers are very, very well compensated. So that's something that some of you may experience in the future. The idea here, as we've said before, is to create new capabilities. I would especially say this is something you need to be very, very cautious about as a company. You can shoot yourself in the foot if you do not know what you are doing, which is why companies need very, very well-defined processes for how they are going to engage in customization, how they're going to manage it over time, and in general, your best bet is to avoid this as much as possible. Okay, avoid when possible. And the fact is, sometimes it's not possible to avoid, which is why we do it. But we don't want this to be the first tool in our toolbox. I've talked to CIOs, high-level managers, and I'm recalling a conversation I had. This is probably going back about 8 years ago with a lady who has since retired, who was the head of development in the SAP space for Oak Ridge National Laboratories. OR now runs SAP. And she said that they recently had a project at the time I talked to her where they decided that they needed to customize the system. And they invested a lot of money writing a lot of code to customize the system. And when they were done, a consultant came and was working on a different project, and he learned about this, and he said, well, why didn't you just do that through configuration? And it turns out the system already would have done what they wanted it to do. They didn't know that functionality was there. Now, you might say, well, that was kind of a weird situation. I had a student taking this class 3 years ago who worked for a company that wasn't running SAP, but was running a different enterprise information system. And he worked in IT. And he had a project where he had to go out and meet with various people in the organization to talk to them about their computing needs. And he met with the salespeople, and as I recall, salespeople said, you know, we go to trade shows and we get a lot of customer information, and we put all of this into these Excel spreadsheets. And they showed him all these very sophisticated Excel spreadsheets, and they said, we would love it if there was a way that we could just put this into the system. And he said, there is. Let me show you how. And he took 5 minutes to show them something that was a part of the system that the company had owned and operated for years, and they were just dumbfounded. And they moved to using that away from their Excel spreadsheets. They had created this whole fairly sophisticated system on their own just because they didn't know what their system could actually do for them. That is not rare in an organization at all. And that's why before we ever engage in customization, we need to be really, really sure that we really do this. This is an area, the last thing I'll say, where it's kind of like the 80-20 rule comes into play. It is very likely that 80+% of what you want to do with your system can be achieved through configuration. But it's that last 20% that you can't get it to do exactly what you want it to do, where you're forced to engage in customization. Now, I have one more slide that I would like to talk about. We have about 3 minutes left, and so we'll do that, and then call our attention or call our time together today to a close. And it's this question: why learn configuration? By the time we get to the end of this semester, if you have earned a good grade, you will have an above average understanding of how ERP systems actually work. That's what this is about. Most people know how to drive a car. Very few people could take an engine apart and put it back together again. That's what configuration does for us. We're going to move beyond just knowing how to run the system and actually learn how it works. Now, here's why that's really important. ERP systems are very complicated. A lot of people are afraid of these systems. And when problems happen, they just kind of throw up their hands and give up. You are going to experience, and we'll talk more about this next time, challenges in doing your labs, where you will do something wrong in step 17. And 2 months later, when you're trying to do something else, it won't work. And you'll be wondering, why does this not work? Well, you've got to think back through, you've got to understand how all the pieces went together, and you've got to realize, okay, the car isn't starting, and it's not because the button I'm pushing doesn't work, it's because something's wrong in the fuel pump, and so this is what I need to check. And so you're going to hopefully have an understanding of how to troubleshoot problems. And so, while I'll talk about this next time, I do not encourage you to make mistakes in your lab work, okay? But you will make mistakes in your lab work. And that is arguably the best learning experience you have, because you're going to try and do something and it won't work, and you're going to have to figure out how to fix it. We'll talk about that when we get together on Thursday. Any questions you guys have before we head out? All right, well, have a good rest of the day, a good startup of the semester, and I'll see you guys when we get together on Thursday.